The whole purpose is to get to know each other and identify what it is that you're kind of working towards, and see how you can use this room as a platform to help you kind of accelerate that network that you want to build for your own personal net worth. So I'm a strong believer that your network is your greatest asset, and Mike's right. I went to uni, I did the good little wog boy thing, I studied hard, got good grades, and I picked something that sounded really interesting, and it took me about 6 months to figure out exactly what it was, and that was nuclear medicine. And so 18 years later, I'm still working in that industry. But one interesting thing about I suppose the way I think and the way my wife Patricia thinks, she's got a background as a high school science teacher, but together we've always been entrepreneurial, always had our fingers in a lot of different pies, always believed that you're not restricted or limited by your thinking or by a title, per se, so I'm a teacher, so that's what I am. So I'm not identified by a job, I'm identified by what I want. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like I'll teach my kids. I've got 2 little boys, Anthony who's 13 and Christian who's 10. I teach them from now. I say to them, do well in school, do your best. I'll accept that you've done your best, but I won't accept that you didn't try. And but at the end of the day, when you think about what you want to do in the future, think about what you find value and enjoy, rather than what's going to pay you the most. Because I don't want to hear you want to be a lawyer or a doctor because of the money. I want to hear that you want to be X, Y, and Z because that's what you're going to find passion in. Does that make sense? And not necessarily, let's face it, most things that people do for passion, they lose the passion because when they do it for money. Do you know what I'm getting at here? Like a lot of teachers, so I love teaching till they teach like high school, and then they realise how much they hate it. But they really enjoy teaching. Anyway, I'm not going to go on about that, but I'll talk about that because the first thing I want to kind of mention in this slide is this whole experiment that was done with the fleas. So this whole concept of thinking about what you want to do, have in your life, as opposed to what do I want to do as a job. So if you have a kind of lifestyle you have in mind, a kind of way you want to live, things that you want to do, travel, stuff like that, a lot of people, what they do is they kind of bring that down to fit what their job will pay them, rather than think, well, what can I do outside of my job, like a side hustle, for example, that will increase this income to kind of match this lifestyle or this picture that I have in my head of what I want from my life. And that kind of brings me to this little experiment that was done. Scientists are really interesting people. They're kind of on the spectrum a little bit in terms of they don't think like the average person thinks. They always ask questions as to why are things the way they are. Does that make sense? So why do fleas jump so high, and what happens if I put a lid on this jar? And after a while, will the fleas keep jumping that high? So there's an experiment, it's called the flea experiment. It was done, and they put fleas in a jar and they let them jump, and they measured how high they could jump. And what they did then was they put basically a lid on this jar, and then the fleas obviously jumped. The fleas hit the top of the lid, and then what they noticed was that after a while of jumping and hitting themselves on this lid, the fleas worked out exactly how much they need to jump to kind of get high enough but not hit that lid. Does that make sense? So they limited the height that the fleas were jumping at. And the interesting thing is, once they took that lid away, the fleas kept jumping, but only to the height at which that lid was at. Which basically, and brings me to the whole concept of people. So a lot of people, especially when they're young and they're growing up, have this kind of idea of what they want, and they can leap as much as these fleas can leap. But somewhere along the way, someone's put a lid on them. You might call it like the glass ceiling, whatever, but someone's put a lid on them and limited their ability to excel. Could have been a teacher said something to them, could have been a parent, could have been a colleague, could have been a friend, could have been circumstances that happened in their life, could have been, maybe they tried something once and it didn't work out, and so they'll never try that again. And look, I hear stories like that all the time. Or back in the 80s, people did this and the interest rates went up, and then since then they've done nothing. So for 30 years, at the point in time in the economy where we've had the greatest amount of growth, uninterrupted growth, they did nothing because of what happened then. Does that make sense? It's kind of like, it'll happen again. So you hear all these stories, and so these are what I will term the lid on your life that's holding you back from achieving the things that you really want to achieve in your life. And it could be any one of these things, but probably the one that would be the most important out of all of those is the comfort zone. And you've probably heard that a million times before, but essentially everything that you want in your life is outside your comfort zone. Everything that you want. Anything that is comfortable for you right now basically means you're just not pushing yourself hard enough. You could probably push yourself just that little bit more. And that's kind of like, that whole extra mile concept. You push yourself to get to where you want to go, but if you push yourself just that little bit more, that extra mile, that's getting yourself out of your comfort zone. It's getting uncomfortable, doing things that you're not normally used to doing, being scared about it, being scared about the result that you're going to get from it. But how are you going to know if you don't try? And I suppose regret's one of those things. It's that gift that keeps on giving. Lots of people have regrets in their life, and the older you get, the more regrets you have. But what could you do in your life from this point forward to minimize the number of regrets you're going to add to that list? And that's kind of like getting out of your comfort zone. The journey to success will take you outside of your comfort zone. It's always going to happen. And Einstein said if you want to get different results, you have to use the different thinking to the one that created the problem in the first place. So that's why I'm a firm believer of building networks, associating with other people, because if you share your ideas with other people, then other people have not necessarily just opinions, but they are free-thinking people. They can come up with ideas that will help you solve the problems that you have. And I suppose that's the whole concept of why you have a coach in business, or not because they did better in business than you, but they have a different perspective than what you have. We've always kind of had this it's not a motto. I even hate that word motto, but it's not a motto, but it's kind of like a saying, and it's a formula for success. And the formula for success is you need to do work, because anything that's worth achieving in your life requires work, effort. And you need to have a dream, a goal, an aspiration, something you're striving towards. But on top of that, I'd probably add one more to this equation, and that's a vehicle. You need something that you're going to put work and a dream into to get you the result that you want. Because there's no point. There's lots of people sitting at home with the willingness to work and a dream and achieving nothing. Does that make sense? Like, you need something to put that effort into, whether it's a business, whether it's an occupation, whether it's an idea like a startup, but you need something to put, a vehicle to put that effort into, otherwise you're not going to achieve success. And basically success in this instance is the realization of what it is that you want, that dream, that goal. Which brings me to goal setting. I don't know if you've ever done this, but you speak to a lot of people and there's always this whole conversation you have with them. Oh, I'm going on holiday. Anyone been on a holiday recently? Plan a trip? Okay, next week we're having a travel talk and we need to inspire you to kind of go out and see beyond the suburb. But anyone planned a night out, like a weekend away, or... But you've all been working hard on your dream, right? Yeah? Okay. Well, when you talk to people about, where they're going to travel to or what they're going to organise for their birthday, or there's a lot of planning involved. Have you noticed that? It's like, what are you doing on the weekends? Kind of like the main conversation you start having with people on Thursday, Friday. What are you doing on the weekend? It's like you've actually planned, you're going to take the effort now to sit down and plan something. Now, whether that's 5 minutes or 15 minutes, I can guarantee you it's a hell of a lot more than what most people spend planning their life. Okay, because a lot is involved, in construction. If you're going to build a house, you've got to do plans, you've got to put in all your applications, you've got to get all your consultants involved, you've got to get a lot of things in place in order to build something. You can't just rock up one day with a bulldozer and just demolish the house and start. That's not going to work out for you, I promise you, okay? But your life is kind of like that. You kind of you got to start off with the picture of what you want your life to look like, and then several steps in place in order to achieve that. Because you're not going to wake up one morning and okay, I've got everything that I want. It's going to be a process. Does that make sense? It's kind of like when you put a jigsaw puzzle together, you don't just open the box and it comes out already made. It comes out in like 1,000 pieces, and all you've got is the picture on the lid of that box. If you don't have the picture, it's bloody hard to put those jigsaw pieces together. So you need to have a picture. There's a 5-year timeline. You can just jump online and just Google it, and you'll get like 100 different 5-year timelines. Okay, and we talk about 5-year timelines. Most people talk about 10, but out of all due respect, some people can't think beyond the years. So there's no point talking about 10 years. Let's just talk about 5 years from now. In 5 years from now, how old are you going to be? How old's your partner going to be? How old are your kids going to be? How much debt do you have now? How much debt will you have in 5 years? How much are you earning at the moment? In 5 years' time, how much do you want to be earning? How much passive income do you make right now? If it's none, then how much do you want to be making in 5 years? If it's a lot now, how much do you want to keep making in 5 years? Because things can change. Do you have a plan? Like, what's your life going to look like in 5 years from now? Or are you just going to keep jumping and hitting your head on the lid that's on the jar? Does that make sense? So you've got to have a picture. If you've got a picture, you can sit down and you can put a list of all the things that are important to you in your life, and you can't project yourself into 5 or 10 years from now if you don't know where you're at. Does that make sense? And that works with your life, it works with your business, it works with your job. Like, who's got a job and after 5 years you're just doing exactly the same thing you were doing before, earning the same amount of money that you were earning before, and nothing's changed? But some people sit there and think, okay, in 5 years I want to progress up the ladder. I want to be here in 5 years. I know I can't get there unless I get to here first. And then from that position, I can work a little bit, maybe do this course, and then I can. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't just get promoted up the ranks. You got to kind of work your way through it. But you got to know where you want to end up. You want to know all these steps that you need to take in order to get there. If you don't build your dream, someone will hire you to build theirs. And I'll be honest with you, I say to my kids, I'll say to my wife even, like, let their kids do the best they can at school. You know, it doesn't matter. It's not indicative of anything. But at the end of the day, do you want to be the guy who's the best or the smartest or the most, who achieved the most at school, got the best degree, now is working in a 37-story tower, building somebody else's dream for a paycheck? Or do you want to be the guy hiring those people to build your dream? Does that make sense? Like, I don't want it to come out the wrong way, but I hope you understand what I mean. Like, who here has their own business? Okay, why do you have your own business? Why aren't you using your skills and just working for someone else?
Did that, it's no fun. Just get anywhere.
Did it help build your dream? Built there. Like, you get the idea here, right? That's the whole concept of if you don't know what you want, someone else will use you to get what they want. That's pretty much the bottom line. Your success is measured by the strength of your desire, the size of your dream, and how you handle disappointment along the way. Anyone just achieve everything they want just like that? Just like that? No struggle? Yeah, alright, Mike. There's a saying that I heard once and I liked it, so I remembered it. And it's called, don't deny the gift of struggle. Have you heard that one before? And it's actually a story behind it. I might as well tell it to you. I heard a story about these kids that were in a lab. They were doing some science experiment. They had a cocoon, and it was, obviously you got the larva inside the cocoon, and it was starting to open up, and a butterfly was coming out. And what the students noticed was that the butterfly was struggling. So what they did, they went and got a scalpel and they kind of slit the cocoon, and they let the butterfly out. But then what they also noticed after doing that was that the butterfly just sat there, and it was fat, and it had little tiny wings, and it was just like a blob, and it didn't really do much, and it just kind of like sat there. So one of them called the teacher over and said, we helped the butterfly get out of the cocoon, but it's not like, it just doesn't look well at all. And obviously the teacher said, what you don't understand, what you don't realize is that the butterfly cuts a small hole in the cocoon, and it needs to squeeze itself through. It has to struggle to get out of the cocoon in order to push all the fluid that's in its fat body into the wings to open up the wings. And then once it does that, it sits there, dries them out, and it can fly away. What you've done is you've denied the butterfly the struggle. Does that make sense? Without the struggle, you can't have the butterfly. So it's a really good story, because without the struggle, you don't grow. And without that growth, your business or whatever you're trying to do in your life, you're not going to get to where you can truly achieve the success you want without that struggle. You know, like no pain, no gain. It's another way to kind of put it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I don't know why that's there. I don't know what that is. Okay, so if you haven't read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, by the way, I've read that book a long time ago. If you're sitting in a room, who here has a job, just works for somebody? Yeah? No, not a business or anything. Okay. Employed, self-employed, business owner and investor. If you haven't read the Cash Flow Quadrant, go and get this book so you can understand where you are in terms of the way money works in society. When you're employed and self-employed, you work for money. You exchange your time for money, for an hourly rate or for a commission or whatever it is. You don't work, you don't get paid. In the business owner and investor quadrant, you have systems built into the vehicles you're working on, whether it's a business or whether it's an asset like shares or property development or whatever, but you have systems built in where money gets created without you physically needing to work for it. You might work on it but not necessarily exchanging time for money, so money is working for you. On the right hand side, because you've got time and because you've got money working for you, you have time and you have money, which frees you up to focus on the things you really want to do. On the left hand side, in the employee and self-employed, because you have to physically work for money, if you don't work, you don't get paid. And if you have a lot of money, you generally have no time. And if you have a lot of time, you generally don't have a lot of money. And the only way you're ever going to move from being an employee or a self-employed is basically you need a vehicle. You need something to put your effort into, you need a system, and you need, in some cases, capital, money. But probably the most important thing is to understand what each quadrant actually is, so you know that the quadrant you're in, how you're going to move yourself from the left to the right. The thing is, a lot of people are in business, but they're really self-employed. And probably the main reason why they're self-employed is because they lack the ability to put enough trust in other people, because they have the mentality that if it's gonna get done, it's got to get done properly. Does that make sense? Whereas a B business owner will say, as long as they can get it at least 80% as good as how I will do it, then they hand it over to them, which frees their time up to go and focus on something else. Does that make sense? Otherwise, you're never ever going to move from the left to the right, because if you're going to do it all yourself, and if it's got to be done, if you want a good job, you do it yourself, well, you're never going to be free. Does that make sense? Free of the need to work for money. So, good book to read. People skills is probably another one that's going to help you kind of achieve some of the goals that you want. I did a talk last week about some psychological tricks that you can use, but probably a really great book to go and get is Skill with People, and understand that so long as you keep the conversation focused on them, they'll have the most interesting conversation they'll ever have, because it's about their favourite topic, which is themselves. And your attitude is definitely something that's going to dictate whether you stay in business for a lot of people. Two things define you: your patience when you have nothing, and your attitude when you have everything. Now, Patricia, my wife, is a teacher, but she's not a normal teacher. In that, a teacher is obviously, you go to uni, you study how to teach. You know, she's a science teacher, so you study how to teach biology, chemistry, etc., etc. But obviously, because of our attitudes from years ago, and the things that we've done, and the association with other people, and coming to events like this, and building and expanding our network and meeting other people, we've been able to get into a whole variety of different industries, associate with different people. So if you talk to her, she's an entrepreneur, she's not a teacher. But she's a teacher that could teach you how to make money. Does that make sense? Only because of the things that she's learned. So now as a teacher, teaching, and obviously moving through the ranks there as well. She went back to teaching after like 12 years of raising the kids, getting them, getting the eldest to high school, and realizing that, she wants to do more. But as a teacher, she's an employee but an entrepreneur at the same time. So she brings with her the people skills, the association, the things that she learned into an industry where most of the people she associates have never had any exposure to that. Does that make sense? Now, if you understand, kind of half understand what I'm trying to explain, can you see how far ahead and how much of an advantage you'd have over the peers that you work with when you have a completely different education, so to speak, than what they have? Because it's all about your attitude, your thinking, your mindset. If you only know what you've been taught, then there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't know. Make sense? And so this is her doing an ad for, you know, those license plates, the My Plates?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? So she wrote a letter telling them about her play and like a little bit of her story, and so she won. And so they came and did a whole photo shoot and whatever. You know, see those people on the cars, and her license plate is DRMBIG. So can you imagine you're a teacher and you rock up at school? It's got a different car now, but you rock up at school and a license plate is DRMBIG. Anyone know what that stands for?
Dream big.
Dream big. It's kind of like, man, is this a teacher? What teacher gets dream big as a license plate?